Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, AllAboutAnika. Now, if you guys have not been here before, then you might not have heard about my series, but I like to do a series called Motivational Mondays. And what I like to share on this series is just a little bit of motivation, tips, tricks to get your week started. Now, I'm not even recording this on a Monday, and you might not even be watching this on a Monday, but I just want to share some positivity and some motivation to help you get through your day, your week, your month, your year, whatever you name it. So if you are new, please consider subscribing. I am a small YouTuber and it means the world to me. And if you do like Motivational Monday videos, then please do give this video a thumbs up. I really appreciate it. Now, on today's topic, we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome. Now, I know that has been a term that's been floating around in the educational, business, personal, any kind of sphere of your life. You've probably heard the term imposter syndrome. And today I wanted to come on here and discuss what it is exactly and how I've dealt with it and how I have imposter syndrome, and also my tips and tricks on how you might be able to solve your case of imposter syndrome. So, imposter syndrome is that voice inside of your head that keeps telling you that you're a fraud, that you're not good enough, that you haven't done enough to be who you are. And it's that voice that tells us that someday everyone's gonna figure out exactly who you are, and that voice, again, is imposter syndrome, and that's what we're gonna talk about today. So some of the phrases that you might have heard before are, you just got lucky. This project was really easy. The next one won't be this easy. Everyone's just being nice to you. You weren't really good at that job. Sure, you finished that project, but just barely. You only got that job because you were referred by a friend. Don't know what you're talking about, and when you give this presentation, everyone will know you're a fraud. You will fail and everyone will laugh at you. Hands up if you've heard those voices before in your head and you felt it inside that you weren't really living up to your potential, or you were feeling like a bit of a fraud whenever you got up to do a presentation or an exam or any sort of important moment of your life when the voice in your head was really telling you you weren't good enough. Put your hands up, because I definitely have felt that. So today I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why we hear that voice in our head, and I'm also going to share some tips and tricks on how you can maybe mute that voice or at least tone it down so that you can carry on with your life. Remember, you're great at everything you do, and these voices are just limiting beliefs, and we'll learn how to control them, and you'll remember that you are actually really great at everything you do. And don't worry if you feel like you're the only one that has this. Trust me, you don't, and I'll get to that later in this video, but you're not the only person that's suffering with imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome is when you start to question your achievements. So maybe when you are speaking at a conference or you get a promotion at work. Imposter syndrome technically doesn't happen when you're doing things like making a sandwich or brushing your hair or going for a walk. It's usually a direct correlation with when you feel yourself achieving something or ready to achieve something great in your life. So when I started doing research for this video, I found a great quote that kind of defines what imposter syndrome is and why it is we're feeling this way. Now, if you want to have some more resources on imposter syndrome and how it affects us daily, I'll actually link down below all the different articles that I found and I was reading when I was doing research for this video. But let me share this one quote first. Imposter syndrome can be defined as a collection of feelings of inadequacies that persist despite of evident success. It's a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. So I hope today, as I share my experience of imposter syndrome, it'll help you feel a little bit better and make you realize you're not alone when it comes to this psychological pattern that we all face, and we all have this issue. So I hope sharing my experience as well as my tips and tricks makes you feel a little bit better about yourself today and gives you the motivation you need to make it through today. So to put imposter syndrome into my own words, what I feel is imposter syndrome is the fear of your friends, your family, your colleagues, your loved ones not believing you're as successful as you portray yourself to be. So imposter syndrome is usually an issue that persists amongst high achievers like students, entrepreneurs, and even famous people. The first famous person that I want to share that actually has imposter syndrome and has admitted it in her book, Lean In, is Sheryl Sandberg, who is the COO at Facebook. Now, she's a very well-accomplished woman. Her book is magnificent, but in her book, she highlights many a times where she felt that she was an imposter at Harvard. And even when she first started her first jobs in the tech industry, she really felt like she was an imposter because she was the only woman. Another famous person that suffers with imposter syndrome is Lady Gaga. Now, you would think she's a pop idol and she's so amazing and she just slays when it comes to performing. But she has admitted on numerous articles that she actually feels like a scared kid before she gets on stage and she goes to perform. And she has to give herself a mental hype up to make sure that she feels ready to go and perform. Otherwise, imposter syndrome kicks in and she doesn't feel like she's good enough. Another famous person with imposter syndrome is former First Lady Michelle Obama. Now, she's mentioned numerous times, both as First Lady as well as her time after being First Lady, that she feels like no one really is listening to her and she's really not as important as everyone makes her out to be. And she can't believe till this day that she has the reach and the influence that she does. And a lot of times she says to herself in her head, do they really care? Are they really interested in me? And so that's her imposter syndrome kicking in. She also said that it never really goes away. It's something that you have to learn to deal with, and it's something that you kind of replay in your head again and again, but it's not something that you can master, and it's not something that you can just brush away. It's something you have to work on. And finally, the last celebrity that I have to share that faces imposter syndrome is J-Lo. She always says that sometimes she just doesn't feel like she's as good of a singer or her voice isn't as strong as other singers, and she really has to hype herself up again before getting on stage or performing. And now I think that's a little bit of J-Lo's just crazy. I just think imposter there, because how does someone look like that at 50? But regardless, J-Lo also suffers with imposter syndrome, even though she looks like she's got it all figured out on the outside. So now that I've shared a few examples of some famous people that suffer with imposter syndrome, I thought I would share some of my issues with imposter syndrome and what parts of my life that I suffer with imposter syndrome. So the first example of imposter syndrome in my life is at work. I am actually a full 9 to 5, 40 hours a week employee in the technology and software space, and I'm actually the only female director within my company. And more times than not, I've usually been one of the very few female managers or directors in my career. Recently, let's say in the last 5-6 years. And a lot of times my imposter syndrome kicks in and I am at a meeting or I'm in a room with, a lot of other men or more older people. And a lot of time my imposter syndrome kicks in, and in my brain, I'm like, oh, am I qualified enough to say something? Or, am I really supposed to be here because I'm so young, or I'm a female, or things like that. And I always pep myself up, and I realize at the end that, I'm meant to be there. But a lot of times when I go into meetings or even into certain environments in the office, I am the only female manager or the only female director. And a lot of times that is quite intimidating, and it makes me feel like, am I a fraud? Do they think that I'm not good enough for my job, etc.? So the second example of imposter syndrome in my life is actually through my blog and my Instagram. And if you're not already following me on Instagram, I do have a large-ish following on there. I still think I'm a micro influencer, but if you like to follow me on there, I like to share my life every day on Instagram. But a lot of times I get the feeling of imposter syndrome when brands, or let's say bigger brands, actually approach me for collaborations. Now, I think it's overwhelming and I get so excited to work with some of these brands, but usually once I say, yes, I'd love to work with you, there's a moment of where I'm like, oh my gosh, is my content good enough? Do I have a large enough following? Are they really gonna like the content I produce? And all these thoughts go through my head, and I get really nervous if I'm actually good enough to be working with this brand. Now, it's taken me a number of years to adjust to the fact that these brands are approaching me for a reason, whether they like my photography, they like my engagement rate, they enjoy my content, whatever the reason, they are reaching out to you for a reason. So I really have to remind myself that I'm not an imposter when it comes to my social media influence. And finally, my third example of imposter syndrome is actually speaking at conferences. Now, I've been very lucky that throughout my career, especially early on as well as recently, I've been invited to speak at fairly large conferences that are designed for professionals in my line of work. And I've been asked to speak about my experiences and my techniques and my strategies. And I think at first, especially the first time I got asked to speak on stage, I was in front of maybe 5,000-6,000 people, and I couldn't believe that everybody was taking notes on things I had to say. And even right before I got on stage, I remember the feeling in my mind was like, oh my gosh, no one's gonna believe me. Everyone's gonna think that, oh, why did they get this lady as a speaker? She really has nothing to say that's to add value to this conversation. And anyways, I realize now that I have the experience, and even though my age might not be, 30 years experience in the industry, my experience is still unique to who I am, and sharing that is quite valuable, and people find it value, whether they're my age or 20 years my senior. So I really had to get over my fear of being too young to be speaking at these conferences and just go out and do it. And now that I've done it, I've obviously been invited back multiple times, and it's really reassuring that I'm not just a fraud saying or selling some sort of idea that's not actually something that I practice and something that I do every day in my career. So my initial response to all of these opportunities, whether it was my first job as a managing director or my first experience with blogging and working with major brands, or even my first time speaking at a conference, my initial response was always super excited. I got really excited and I was really ready to tackle the challenge that was put in front of me. And then the next thing kicked in, which was imposter syndrome. And at that point, I was really struggling to see that I was meant for this job and I was meant to be a part of a conference or a part of a brand collaboration. I guess it's the natural flow of how you get really excited for something and then you get really scared that you're not good enough. But let me tell you, you are good enough. Remember that that's just a voice in your head. You were invited to speak at that conference, or you were invited to work with that brand because you are good enough. You are not an imposter. So a lot of what I'm saying and sharing right now may sound like I have a confidence issue, and that's not the case. That's not imposter syndrome. I actually do have a video that shares how to be truly confident in yourself. I'll link it in the cards right now so you can check it out. It's another Monday motivational video. But imposter syndrome actually has nothing to do with self-esteem. It is a totally different psychological issue. So another thing I learned while doing my research around imposter syndrome is that it actually affects more women than men, which is really infuriating because I just feel like women have lots of other things stacked against them, and then we obviously experience imposter syndrome more than men do. And I feel like I've come a long way to battle imposter syndrome, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate as well, but statistically, it does affect more women than it does men. So now on to my tips and tricks of how to address imposter syndrome and how to really squash it and how to kind of overcome imposter syndrome. So my first tip is to recognize that I have it and that other people have it too. So like I said at the beginning of this video, you're not alone. I obviously face imposter syndrome, and I listed a whole bunch of celebrities that also are suffering with imposter syndrome. But just as a reminder, you're not alone, and you just need to address that you do have imposter syndrome and really let that internalize. Remember that that's just a voice in your head. That's not actually what people think, and it's not how you are perceived. It's just the voice in your head trying to make you believe that that's how you are perceived. If you were to actually ask people, ask your partner or ask your best friend or ask your colleague, hey, do you think that I'm not good enough for this job, or I'm not, smart enough to do this essay, or I'm not capable enough of speaking at this conference, you'll probably quickly find out that every single person you talk to is like, no, you're amazing. You're totally deserving of that. So just accept it, internalize that this is a voice in your head and not what other people actually think of you. So my second tip is to separate feelings from facts. So make a list of things that are actually factual. So when you are experiencing imposter syndrome, a lot of times things are going through your head like you're not good enough, or, there are other people who are better than you at this, or you're just not as capable to do this, etc., etc. But the best way to combat that, in my experience, is make a list of your accomplishments. So say, I'm good enough because I did this in my last job. I'm smart enough because I passed this test with flying colors. I'm capable enough because I've done, this many conferences before. Whatever the case is, make a list of your accomplishments. And it is very easy to combat imposter syndrome if you suddenly have a list of everything you've actually done, because that's factual. That's not in your head. That's actually going through a list in your head and saying, this is exactly what I've done in my life, and that's the reason I am here today. And imposter syndrome or not, I'm going to be able to accomplish more because I've already done X, Y, and Z. And finally, my last tip is to psych yourself up. Be your own cheerleader. It is so important. Like, obviously other people are going to cheer you on, and you're going to have family members and loved ones that are going to make sure that you have the support you need. But really, right before you get on stage to speak on that conference, or right before you go into a meeting to present this big presentation that you've been preparing for months, you need to psych yourself up. You need to remember that, I'm the best at what I'm doing, and I was chosen to do this task because I am really good at presentations, or whatever the case may be. Just like J-Lo, just like Lady Gaga, all these performers go and psych themselves up before they actually go and perform. So guys, that brings me to the end of this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed hearing about my experience of imposter syndrome and how I've dealt with it. And I really hope it helps you guys. If it does, please do leave a comment down below on maybe some of the imposter syndrome symptoms that you're feeling and how you deal with it. We're all a community of sharing. And I really hope that this motivated you to have a good day, a good week, a good month, a good life. I really encourage having a positive outlook in life. So if you do like Motivational Mondays, do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye!